Well, good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. My name is Deb Turcott, and I'm the principal at ORIANA Solutions. In just a few minutes, I'll get to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. We're going to have quite a few people joining us tonight, so I'll admit people as the evening goes on. But tonight's session is all about following your passion, and so it starts off the second segment in our series for Women Not Working. The webinar series really designed for women who've been impacted by the pandemic professionally. But the Making the Most of the Transition segment is all about how do we use this time, whether we're underemployed or unemployed, or really trying to figure out what might come next, or perhaps because we're working from home, we might have a little more time on our hands to really investigate and invest in our future. And so we're excited tonight to kick off that segment with Amy Nichols, who is the Vice President of Outreach, Engagement, and Training with the Humane Society of the United States. It's a really long title because she has a lot going on pretty much every day. But I had the blessing of getting to know Amy when I was with PetSmart Charities, and we were doing work together to serve animals and communities across the United States, Puerto Rico, and Canada. And so Amy is a serial entrepreneur, as we call them, and has had this amazing career where she has started both for-profit and nonprofit businesses. She's franchised, she has a patent. So when we talk about the creative mind and the ability to take ideas to action and either make them into a mission-driven organization or a profit-driven organization, Amy has been able to do that. And so I'm really excited for you to be able to hear from her tonight. And we're going to do this interview style, but I'm going to encourage you in just a minute. I'll welcome you all via chat. And I would encourage you to share questions over chat if you'd like to, or if there are thoughts that you want to share, but it'll be a great way for me to better understand if there's other questions I need to infuse into the interview for tonight. And of course, again, at the end of the evening, we'll make some time for questions then as well. I also want to remind you that next week we'll be back with another session with Michelle Telwani. She is a community relations professional with the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. I've known Michelle for the better part of 20 years and have not met anyone else in my career who is able to network or build more engaging relationships, either for raising funds or moving an idea forward. And so you will really want to attend that session with Michelle so you can take advantage of her knowledge and expertise on how to build your LinkedIn network, how to view your blind spots in your network, how to be brave in your networking approach. So don't miss out on that session, which will be next Wednesday evening, January 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And so with that, I'm going to take us into the conversation with Amy. So Amy, welcome.
Good evening and Happy New Year.
I know it's hard to believe it's 2021 and starting with the bang, I think, as we can all see. But I would love to, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just take a couple of minutes, Amy, and maybe tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how your path started to becoming an entrepreneur, and how did that take you into working with animals?
Well, I would say I've always been an animal lover. That's a passion of mine I've had since I was very little. Like many people, though, I always envisioned the path being becoming a veterinarian. You know, that's as a little girl, you're thinking, what's the ultimate? It would be taking care of animals and saving them, right? So I thought that's what I would be doing until I went to college and realized that I was actually a lot more business focused, and physics and chemistry were not really my thing. So that derailed a little bit, but my heart was always with animals and thinking about how ultimately that's what I wanted to do. And as I learned more about pet care and the pet industry, I really felt like what I was going to need to do was something on my own. And so I went into a normal job for the first time in my life and did that for a few years while I started thinking about what could this business look like.
Excellent. And so what were the steps that you took as you were really thinking about starting this business, and when you when you took it from feeling like I'm passionate about animals to I'm actually going to do something with this passion, how did you journey through that for yourself?
Well, I did have an advantage in that as a younger person, I did a lot of dog sitting and pet sitting for neighbors and things. I also worked in pet retail for years in high school. And what that showed me is things that I knew I didn't want to do. I knew I didn't want to sell pets. I wanted to take care of them. So I automatically started focusing more on that type of business. But I also knew in my case, I was passionate about dogs in particular, loved how social they were, and really wanted to create some kind of a business because dog daycare was really unheard of at that time, that would allow dogs to be communicating and hanging out with each other versus isolated in kennel runs and things. So I started looking into that. It's amazing how much information you can find when you start doing research. But I would say the other thing is to really think about what are the things you do in your free time that you're passionate about outside of work. What's the stuff you choose? What are the things you get lost on Pinterest following? What are the things that you find in hours gone by and it went like a flash? That's the stuff that you're kind of naturally drawn to. And that's where I would probably start, because you're going to need that passion to keep going. You're going to need something in you that makes you driven to succeed, and not just because you'll be successful and make money, but because it matters to you and it's important to you and it's kind of innate, a part of you.
And it was interesting when we did the kickoff session for this series, I talked a little bit about in our top 10 list of how to manage the moment. One of the things that people could do was to draft a business plan, because if you care enough about something to even consider starting a business for it, it likely is a deeply seated passion for yourself. And so can you maybe talk a little bit about the decision making that you had to do along the way? Like, when did you know it was right to start a business, or when did you know it was right to adapt or to stay the course? Because I think sometimes that's what freezes us as people, is we're really challenged by knowing when it's the right time to make a different decision about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think there's so many factors that go into it and that you really need to think through. So of course it starts with the passion and the enthusiasm and the heart for it. But there's the practicality of your lifestyle has to be ready for that. You have to have built up a financial cushion, or have a partner or spouse or someone that could be helping support you, because we all still need to maintain our lives. So interestingly enough, when I started Dogtopia, while we were not in a pandemic, it was right after 9/11. And for those that remember what that was like, it was like the world was turned upside down. And I remember so many people telling me, why would you do it now? That's crazy. Everything is, unpredictable. Why would you do it now? And I said, because now is when I'm ready to do it. And I knew there were other factors at play that were coming together. But multiple people told us that. And of course, later they said, that was actually the exactly right time, because you hit the wave, on the way up. But I think that's the most important thing, is if you as a person are ready, if you have the time available, if you have the support of family members, I always say time is of the essence.
I agree. And, I opened my own consulting firm in the middle of the pandemic. So I'm with you on sometimes timing is just awkward, but it's right. But for others, to your point, sometimes it's not right for other people. And, I know that we have some viewers who are really interested in opening their own business, but their personal life right now doesn't allow for that. And that's okay too. But if that's the case, if someone can't do what they're really hoping for, what are some of the things that you could encourage them to do, or steps or techniques or exercises even that maybe they could go through now that will help them work towards that future that they really want?
Well, the biggest one would be research. I mean, I can't overemphasize that. You want to know as much as you possibly can, understanding that you'll never know it all. But I would also say, entrepreneurship is what kind of gets a lot of the attention out there, but that's not the only way to go into business for yourself. And that's not the only way to pursue your passion. And I think, I'm going to talk a little bit about it later, but, I'm still pursuing my passion, but I'm doing it as part of a large nonprofit. Before it was for myself as an entrepreneur. So I would encourage people to look into, it could be consulting, right? It could be taking your expertise and your passion for people and building things and applying it to consulting. It could be buying a franchise. If it's an appealing concept, but you know you're not a marketer, or maybe you're not the most creative, but you really love this work, a franchise might make sense. There's a lot of different business models that could help you really support that passion and the desire you have to do that work without maybe the full throw yourselves into it startup kind of entrepreneur that a lot of people I think of automatically.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the other things we talked about in the kickoff session was, the potential of joining a board, which might also give you that opportunity to stretch some muscles you don't use all of the time, or learn a particular way of doing business, or maybe there's a job between the one you have now and opening your business that takes you down that path closer to what you want, but bridges your current experience with your future goals. So I think those are really helpful tidbits for everybody to be considering. And then when, what were the bumps in the road? Like, they always say Murphy's Law, or be ready for what you're not ready for, or all of those things. But what are some of the bumps that you encountered, and, what did you do with those moments? How did you persevere through them?
There's a meme I like to share online when talking about entrepreneurship, and it's the iceberg, where the tip is all the challenges you know about, but then all the ones under the water that you don't know about. I think it really comes back to resilience, having some support, but ultimately you have to be your own biggest cheerleader, because if you don't believe in it and you're not super passionate about it, no one else is going to, and nor should they, right? Because you need to have the commitment first. And I would say there might have been more bumps than road at some periods during the growth of the business. I mean, I learned a lot the hard way. And this was a true bootstraps kind of business, where we laid the floor and we painted the walls and we learned everything from the ground up. But I think you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls and the bumps and the unknowns by surrounding yourself with really good advisors, some paid. You do want to, if you're really serious about it and you're going to get an SBA loan or get an investor, you got to bring an accountant on early. You want to learn how to set it up properly, and an attorney. I think we always think about attorneys when things go wrong, but they can really help you prevent things from going wrong before it even happens. And I would say I learned a lot that first year about even employment law. That's another thing to consider, is you could be very successful having a consulting career, or you could choose to bring on employees. But the large majority of women-owned businesses actually don't have employees, because it's a whole new realm that you then have to learn and deal with. But I would say, I had a lot of things kind of going against me when I started the business. I used to joke, I said, it's animals, and that tends to be something that people aren't really comfortable with. I was not a previous business owner, and it was an unproven kind of business, because everyone thought it was crazy that who's going to pay you to have their dog play with other dogs? And it turns out millions of people would. But at the time, it was all unproven. And so I really had to work hard and work my network and just keep pressing forward. That first location took almost a year for me to find a landlord that was a good location that was willing to even rent to me. And so that's just a lesson in, persistence and resilience, that it's probably always going to take a little longer for you really to kick it off as well.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, because when I knew I was going to launch the consulting business in 2020, but and I've been doing it on the side for so long, to your earlier points of how do you get from point A to point B. But to really walk through every step to build the website and the marketing plan, and to have the accountant and really set up the company the way that it needed to be. I mean, all of that took more time than I anticipated. And I think it's really fair for some people who have to make a transition, immediately from a paying job to revenue generation in a business. A lot of that'll have to be done behind the scenes. So I think that's really helpful. The other thing that I want to go back to that you mentioned earlier was about having people in your corner. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, besides the professionals that you talked about, maybe some of the other resources. I mean, you are so well connected when it comes to the small business world and investors, and, who are your people? Like, how do they find their own people, so to speak?
Well, it's not easy initially, and it takes you really, I used to kind of like pump myself up before I would go into certain networking meetings and things. I mean, I'm a natural extrovert, but when you're going into an arena of say a small business owner networking meeting or a luncheon or something, and you're the newbie going in, it can be super intimidating. But I would get myself pumped up and I would go in and I would just introduce myself around, and I built up quite an amazing network of women business owners. There are some now that it's been amazing to watch their careers grow. Then we met all the way back in, I'm dating myself, but 2002. And to see how we've tracked along the way. SBA has a lot of great groups. If you look into that, they have localized groups. There's a lot of Chamber of Commerce type groups. I mean, that's where I would start local. Obviously now's a unique time because we're not getting together in person. There's tons of great virtual stuff though too. Anything you're interested in, there are kindred spirits out there for you. You just need to find them. And I think you'd be surprised too how often people are willing to let you take a test drive. So for example, I had quite a few people that worked for me that thought they wanted to own that kind of a business. So I willingly let them, because I said, you know what, better for you to try it out and see before, jumping into it, which is ultimately how I ended up franchising it. But there are opportunities out there. If you're interested in becoming an interior designer, see if there are ways to either volunteer or support someone or shadow someone. Almost any passion that you have, there's probably ways to get engaged early. Because, and I'll say this is an example from college, and one of the ways I knew I didn't want to go to vet school was I volunteered in a biopsychology lab for years. And while I loved the work, for me, it was too, it wasn't expansive and creative enough. It was very kind of specific, and what they did I found kind of redundant. Some people relish that and love it. For me, it wasn't a good fit, which probably saved me many years of graduate school and ended up, not in the right spot for me. So test it if you can, whether that's befriending someone or volunteering. That's something I think is just invaluable information for you.
Yeah, and I think next week when Michelle is speaking with all of us, we'll have a great opportunity to hear a little bit more about, how do you find the spots in your network that are weak, but actually connect you to your future goals. So I think that'll be a great piece. But one of the things that has been surprising to me, and you talked about it with the women that you connected with that were also small business owners, but as a consultant, I have had great relationships for a long time with consultants that in previous roles where I've led companies, I've paid them to do work for my company, and they welcomed me with open arms to sort of the network of consultants, and really became this network of support beyond my own internal and familial group that was supporting me. So I think you're right. I think sometimes we assume competition means there's no cooperation or there's no journey together. But I have found, I think like you have, that there's actually a great network of support that's available. We just don't think it will be. So sometimes we don't go for it the way we should.
And, and just because you're told no the first time, or they don't get back to you on LinkedIn, you don't get a response, keep going. Because whatever's a priority for you, it probably isn't their priority, but you still have to keep going. Because the first couple of people I talked to and asked, they didn't have the time for me, but eventually you will find that person and you will get the right match. I get asked to sit down and can I pick your brain and things like that all the time. So you also have to think about, before you start that ask, is what do you have to offer? So if you cold message someone on LinkedIn, make sure it's something that is compelling. But I will say, in general, most women business owners, people in the business, are happy to at least show you the ropes and help you avoid some of the big pitfalls.
And let's take a minute now to then transition from, so you franchise, you started businesses, you franchised, you had a patent go through, and then you ended up going to a really large nonprofit. Can you talk about that transition? How did you, what did you take with you? Like what transferred for you? What really drove that decision for you? And why did you choose the nonprofit as another way of following your passion after coming out of really running your own shop for quite some time?
It was quite a change. Some might say shocking. I mean, it really was quite an adjustment. And a lot of people told me, oh, you're going to have such a hard time with this because you're used to, doing your own thing and all of that. And so it's important, if you're going to transition to nonprofit, that you find an organization that's going to support those skills that you have. But for me, in 2012, I had private equity, a few different investors approached me about Dogtopia. And very long story short, because that's a whole separate subject, is getting investors and all of that. Ultimately, when I sold my interest in Dogtopia and moved on, I wanted space from it for a period of time. And so I did a lot of interesting work, angel investing. I learned a lot about the VC world. I was very interested in technology, but my heart kept coming back to, but I really love animals. And so if I think back on my life, I kind of had a fork in the road, right? I could have gone veterinary, I could have gone business, or unbeknownst to me, I could have gone nonprofit from the beginning, but it just didn't at the time occur to me that there was a real opportunity there to do something on a national scale to help animals. And so because for the previous 14 years I'd been building a network, I had a pretty good list of people that I could reach out to. So I started reaching out to folks in animal welfare and saying, what do you think? Where could a crazy entrepreneur go and be helpful? And ultimately, one of the folks in my network was the CEO of the Humane Society of the United States. Reached out to him. He put me in touch with someone else there. Turns out they needed someone to run their companion animal program. So working with dogs and cats and small furries. And it kind of was a kismet, came together at the right time for both of us. And so I've now been doing that for 3 years. And a lot of the assumptions I had about it were true, in that it's a lot of the same people. So it's just we just took a different path, right? We pursued animal welfare versus pet care, but it's been an adjustment for sure. But I've also learned a lot of new skills and really kind of a lot of the soft skills, people skills that I learned being an entrepreneur apply 100% in working with any type of people and encouraging them and motivating them. And nonprofit is a different kind of motivation, right? It's about making a difference and making change. And so it's a different kind of management. So it's been a great challenge for me. And I have so much more knowledge now because I switched to this whole other industry.
And this is not a question you and I had discussed in advance. So I'm going to cold ask this question on you right now. But, sometimes I find that people get off track. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but that people end up doing work or in a company, perhaps, that they have some sort of an internal conflict, right? It doesn't align with their value system. And I know you've done some things over the years to really focus on your own values, to remind yourself of your priorities. And I think they've been really practical and pragmatic from my perspective. And so maybe you would, with our viewers, you would just share a little bit about some of those tactics that you've used for yourself to either stay on course or to remind yourself or to remove the internal conflict or make the change if that was necessary.
Yeah, I think we all have to have our own red line, right? Of things that we just know just don't sit with us and are compromising ourselves, which ultimately leads to a whole different kind of stress and difficult and bad situations. But I will say, with the business, relatively early on with Dogtopia, I wanted to have company values. And I always joke that I didn't hire anyone to help me with it. I didn't go to a course. I did a lot of reading early on to learn, but I just sat down and thought, what's really important to me? And how did I make big decisions? And it came actually pretty quickly. And at the top was honesty and integrity, responsibility, accountability. And it went down from there. But ultimately, if you know what your values are, if you know what that line is, then those hard decisions like the employee was dishonest with me in a way that was impactful to a customer in a negative way, that decision is clear. And when you stick to it and you're consistent with it, it just makes life easier. And I think that's something to think about when you start a bit, particularly if you're going to have employees, thinking about what those lines are for you. And that was part of what they learned coming aboard of, here's how we define success here, here's our values. That being said, when you work for someone else, your values and theirs may not match. And I think that's an important thing to look at is if they're not in alignment, you're probably not going to be happy there. And that's something really important that it's also a self-awareness and kind of a self-searching that you need to go through and decide, well, what can I live with, weigh the pros and cons. And ultimately, I think the sooner you can deal with situations like that where you're in conflict, it's the better for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. Oftentimes when I'm coaching people, I'll talk with them about, we can do almost anything for a time. We can manage some sort of an internal conflict for a certain period of time. We can feel maybe a little disconnected but for a long period of time is when it really starts to affect us. It'll affect our health, it'll affect our mental health, it'll affect our relationships. And so because we're not designed as human beings to be in conflict with our own value system, and that's a nagging that we really, we need to pay attention to if we're feeling that. But one of the other things is that, if you know what your end goal is, so for example, you want to run a business, you want to start a business, you might say, all right, I'm willing to do X, Y, or Z for a certain amount of time because I'm going to fill the gaps in my resume or my experience to get to my end goal. But you've made the contract, or you've negotiated with yourself in advance of doing that. So you feel less conflict because you've already made that decision.
Yeah.
But the other thing I often tell people is if you don't have to make that negotiation or set up that contract with yourself, then sometimes if you've been in a challenging situation and you're trying to really find your passion, then find the right boss to work for. I think that's another tool that we can encourage people, that sometimes it's about the company, sometimes it's about the leader. And great leaders will eventually help you find your path. And so even if you're struggling, you aren't, but other people often struggle with, finding their path and what their source of passion would be. And if that's the case, sometimes working for a great leader will bring you on a journey that will help you with that. And I hope you don't mind if I put you on the spot, Amy, but the other day you showed something to me. You took it off your wall and you showed it to me. And so I have to ask you to show the folks that are on with us today a little bit about, because I know Michelle next week will talk about vision boards, but if you could talk a little bit about why you did that vision board and, when you did it, and has it, rang true? Does it still ring true today? Or has there been major shifts in sort of your vision for yourself?
It's interesting. I mean, much like values, I think those core passion and drivers that we have internally, if we really found them, they're pretty consistent, right? Like I may apply my values in a different way, but they're still there. And so what I had shared with, I think it was actually from 2005, 2006. So I already had my business started. But what's interesting is, and I'll show everybody, clearly, I'm an animal lover, and yet it's only a very kind of small little portion here. I went through multiple, this is a really fun thing. If someone's interested in doing this, it's kind of it seems silly, but I mean, this is from 15 years ago, and I think it's still relevant to me, I was with a bunch of other women, and we had a whole bunch of magazines, different types. And we went through and we just very quickly ripped pages out that somehow something about that page was compelling. So we ended up with this pile, and then you start cutting it out and you have this set space, and you got to figure out how you put it on. And I will say mine was very, I spent a lot of time making mine very linear and organized and things, but it was a quick way to really kind of test yourself as to what really is important. What stands out to you? And, I put the future you're planning for. I am futuristic. That's what I think about. Oh, can we see it again?
Yeah, show it again.
All right, let's see. Is there anything on here I don't want people to see? No, I don't think so. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
So I had, it's funny because when I started my business, I was actually newly married. And so I had that we were two nuts on there. I'm also pretty self-aware. So I put find madness. I know that there's a lot going on and I recognize that. But I also put things on like confidence and excellence, and I can certainly put on a good show, but that doesn't mean I'm confident all the time, but I can make that part of my goal. But ultimately excellence in all things was important to me, and pursuing happiness. And I think if you are pursuing the things that you are passionate about at your core, whether it's children or animals or design, it no longer feels like work. It just feels like a life pursuit. And I think ultimately that's what we all want.
No, I think that's great. And thanks, Joyce, for asking to see it again. I think there was a fun one in the bottom right corner as I was looking at it. I can't remember what it said now, but I was like, oh, I like that. Something about running with something.
Oh, Women Who Run with the Ideas, which was a play of Women Who Run with Scissors, I think. So.
Both dangerous, but both rather thrilling, right? It's interesting. I was reading an article several years ago on the difference between men and women or boys and girls in schooling, actually, and how young men typically develop confidence while young women develop competence. And so when in the schooling environment, that actually makes young women typically more successful because education and academia does revolve around competence. But when we get out into whether it's following our passion or reaching out to that connection that we really need to help make something take shape or starting our own business, the confidence is what you to your earlier point, you can't lack confidence in yourself. So you are an exceedingly confident person. Like you know how to like pump yourself up. But I don't know that the people who are on with us today know how to do that for themselves. So like, can you maybe talk us through, like, what does that look like? How does someone help themselves feel confident about who they are, what they've done, where they're going, and their possibilities for success?
I would say this sounds like a really kind of simple thing, but I would say mirroring the behavior of people you admire is a big one. The whole fake it so you make it is 100% true. And, something women oftentimes struggle with is what's called the imposter syndrome, right? And the secret is everyone, whether the CEO or the VP or the entrepreneur, we all feel that at times, that we feel like, well, we're just not enough, or well, what happens when they find out I'm not qualified for this job? That's your brain just messing with you a little. You are qualified for it. You can do it. And I think, honestly, TED Talks, hugely helpful to me. Watching people like Brene Brown talking about being vulnerable and how that's actually powerful. It also shows you that you're alive and you're a caring person. And I think practicing with people that are there to support you, whether it's over a Zoom call or something else. I probably didn't do that as much as I could or should have, but it's incredibly valuable. So if you're nervous about having that phone call with a bank, find someone you can go over it with in advance. And also, there's very few times where you won't have the opportunity to go back and try again, but practicing before you go into it will help. So that's a couple things. I also think it's funny, in Zoom days, it's not so important, but for me, I used to always say, I want to act and dress the part I want to play. And so it's mirroring behaviors, it's language, it's knowing the verbiage before you go in, it's understanding. So if it's a bank call, for example, understand what you're asking for and whether it's even possible. But I think, dressing well is a huge part of feeling good and confident. It doesn't have to be expensive, but feeling put together and polished can make a huge difference when you walk into that room. You're going to be feeling a lot more confident and powerful if you feel well put together.
Yeah, I agree. And, when we have the later session on personal style and confidence, I think Melissa's really going to drive that idea home that you've brought up, Amy. And I think back to the session with Susanna, where we did talk about exactly what you just mentioned, which is practice. I was actually coaching a leader over the past couple of weeks who was going to have to do something for the first time in her career. That was a very uncomfortable action she was going to have to take in her job, and she'd never done it before. And so I was working with her. I actually encourage her, record yourself, practice. And, right now everything's by Zoom, so it'll feel very real because that's how all of this work will take shape. That's so uncomfortable. But I was like, record yourself, watch it, do it over and over again, get to the point where the unknown of doing it is not what holds you back. And you start to develop a real sense of confidence with your own rhythm in doing it. And so, you don't want to be a robot, but at the same time, I think you're right. Feeling prepared, feeling put together, all of those things influence how we feel in the moment. And feeling good about ourselves is a powerful thing that nobody can take from us except us. right? We're the only one who can
Yeah,
take.
and there's something very powerful about saying things out loud. And that's something else for women that are thinking about starting their own business or getting into business. It feels really vulnerable to share your idea. I know, because I dealt with it for a long time, and I have ideas all the time now, and I let them incubate for a while. But by putting a voice to it and talking about it, that's what makes it happen. And so then you're starting to really put it out to the universe, put it out to the world that you're doing something. And so I think it's very powerful to have people you can speak with about your ideas. Like I said, there's so many affinity groups everywhere that there's someone you can talk to about it. But I think putting words to it, and as you mentioned before, putting pen to paper, you start writing things out, that's what's going to make it real. Otherwise, it's just going to stay that little, nugget in your head. And then a year's going to be gone and you're going to say, why didn't I activate on that sooner?
Yeah, that really hits home with me, Amy. Thank you for sharing it in the way that you did, because like for me in my personal journey, it was building the website, having to write the content about our value proposition. What could we offer the world? What distinguished us? What were our strengths? It. I mean, I've got 25 years experience. I'm probably one of the most confident people I know. But the moment it became that real, it was like, wow, okay, now I'm telling everyone that I think I'm good enough to do this. And that's like a moment for just about anyone. And I think, maybe we could transition just quickly from maybe running the business to, I think women feel that way as well. And I hear it from them all the time about deciding to apply for a job that would fit their passion area. Like, oh, I'm not qualified for that. I hear that all the time from women. And I'm constantly talking to women about how they are qualified. But I just, what advice could you give to our viewers today about that moment? Like when you're looking at a job description that you're like, well, I kind of done this, but I haven't done all of it. Like I don't check every single box. To your point earlier of, fake it till you make it, or what have you done? What advice would you give women if they're in that place?
I think ultimately, you really need to think about the interview as a two-way conversation. And I think we often, we're on LinkedIn and we're looking at this, we're like, oh, it's an amazing company and look how big they are and successful, and we're intimidated by that. So we look at it as in, well, they have to approve me or I have to qualify. It really should be that you need to determine if you want to be there, and you need to determine if you want to work for that person that interviews you. And it's really, if you think about it that way, of you want to make sure that you're going to invest your time, if you're going to go commit to working there for the next several years or more, that you're investing your time, which is ticking, right? I mean, we only have so much time, in the right place, because I think as long as we feel like it's all about them asking us and do we fit, we end up in places that maybe aren't the right fit for us anyway. I also think too, and you and I have talked about this, is, sometimes there's interviews and they decline you, and it can be a blessing because they may see something you don't, and they're aware, they know what the environment's like. And they may say, you know what, this person isn't of the right mindset to really be happy here. And you're not always going to be told that, oftentimes you're not. But I would say take it as a sign and a blessing. You don't take it as a personal slight. Take it as in, you know what, I wasn't meant to be there. I'm going to go find the right spot. But I say all that fully understanding it's hard. But I would also say too, prepare and plan on talking about the skills you do have. And, soft skills, people skills, how you work, how you collaborate, how you ideate, all those things you bring. Think about that in advance so you make sure you share about that, because that's very hard to find. Things can be taught. You can learn new software, you can learn new technology, you can learn how to do certain processes, but the skills that you bring to the table that maybe aren't as obvious, that's the stuff that you can't just sit and teach someone.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'm thinking of a sort of a tangent off of that, which is when I talk with women and coach them about they're going for a job that they feel like maybe they're not qualified for. I often, and actually some of our viewers have recommended this for them, where you put something on the board, on the wall, a big piece of paper, And just day in and day out, you're just writing down things you've done, all the things you've done. You don't have to write it all in one day, but just laundry lists. There's no particular order. And normally for them, I will recommend, you start grouping them and you start thinking about the data and the stats and the things that you've caused change in as it relates to the things that you've done. But when it comes to finding your passion, I think there's another way to look at it, which is put those things up there, go back in with a different color marker, circle the things that you loved the most. Like, what were the things that you're like, oh gosh, if I could do that almost every day, I'd be thrilled. And it just starts when you, like you said before, when you put it on paper, it becomes real and you start to acknowledge things about yourself that perhaps before you didn't. So if you've been doing that exercise, if you're one of our viewers that have been doing it, take a different color marker out and start circling things that you were really on fire about, the stuff that you just loved. So as you're working towards those positions of passion for yourself or purpose, you've got sort of a roadmap because of the things you've done in the past that you love.
And you'll start to see a theme. There's themes that weave through that you'll start to see as well. And you'll say, I've been on this path as a project manager, but what I really loved is when I had a team. And I want to really focus, if I'm going to look for a new job, I want to focus on something where I have management and I have a team I work with versus an independent performer, as an example.
Yeah. And, that brings me to another question for you, Amy, which is, what's most rewarding about the work that you're doing now? I mean, it was a big deviation, right? You were running a business. Now you work for this big nonprofit, still connected to your area of passion. But how have you created meaning and purpose in the work that you're doing now? And where are you being rewarded for your own internal value system?
It's actually pretty interesting because when I ran my company, and I will say, I encourage everyone to, one of the ways you're an entrepreneur is if you have that innate curiosity, right? I'm curious about a lot of things, and it's not just animals, it's all kinds of things. And I've always been very interested in psychology and how people work and how they think and how they operate. And one of a session I had gone to at one point, I think it was through Inc. magazine, they talked about, how much time you should be spending developing your people. And I remember thinking, well, why would I spend all my time doing that? I have to grow the business. I say all that tongue in cheek because of course that's what I should have been doing, but that's not where my head was at the time. That is what I do now. And so while I don't own the organization, I do a lot of people development, and I find it incredibly fulfilling because ultimately the people I'm supporting and helping are helping animals. So I'm somewhat once removed, but it's incredibly fulfilling because I'm also seeing people that have so many potential and things, but the nonprofit world's very different in that there isn't as much pursuit of kind of this continuing education and self-improvement. And some of the stuff I've been able to bring in that I've learned through all of the different things I've done, some of the MBA programs and things, they're blown away by it. So I've really enjoyed bringing a lot of that into some folks that are so talented and so smart and haven't had anyone really pay attention to what they're really good at and help guide them. And so it's definitely the people, which if you had asked me when I started the business, that's not where that's why I was saying I learned something very different working in such a large organization than what I did as an entrepreneur.
Well, and that brings us really to our last question because it's about time for us to wrap up. But so what does the future, a bright future for Amy look like? I mean, you have built a career that's been centered around a place of passion and purpose for yourself, but it's taken all kinds of different looks over the course of your career, but it stayed really focused and aligned with your value system. So what would be great enough that it would cause you to think, oh, that's my future?
Oh, well, I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately. We all wish we did, but I ruminate a lot and do a lot of thinking about how do I merge these two worlds? I spent a lot of time thinking about that and how I've learned so much in animal welfare and we've identified things that we feel like we should fix as an animal welfare organization. So as an example, access to care. So access to veterinary care for pet parents. And how do you fix that? And so it's fun for me to think about how would I apply a for-profit approach to a problem identified in nonprofit, and could there be a hybrid? And so I don't have any imminent plans, but it is something I like to think about. And thankfully for me, with my organization, I'm able to work with a lot of people doing those things. So whether it's supporting their work or having grants that we give to them to support it, I am able to help a lot of other folks activate on ways they've figured out that we can solve some problems. So, but I'll always be at the core, you know, a lifetime learner and an entrepreneur, I think.
Yes, well, and that's something that I value about you, because I love that spirit that's in you. So I'm excited for however you'll bridge those two worlds together in the future. So Amy, I'm just going to give everybody a quick minute to see if they have anything they want to share via chat from a question perspective. But I just want to personally thank you. You know, it's been such a joy to get to know you over the last, I don't know, handful of years, but also to get to hear from you tonight. And you know, for some of the folks that we heard from that weren't able to make it last minute, we'll certainly be sending the recording out. And for those of you who are joining us tonight, if you know of others who could really use some helpful advice on how to follow their passion, or some techniques on how to find it, or thinking about starting their business, we're happy to share this recording with them as well. But Amy, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Well, I am grateful for the opportunity. I love pets, I love animals, but I also love helping women get into business and supporting just entrepreneurship and the opportunity. So I'm grateful. It's been really fun to talk about it.
Well, thank you again. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And again, remember, next week we have a Building Your Network, Making Relationships Count with Michelle Talwani, who is doing community relations work in the state of New Hampshire, phenom when it comes to relationship building and understanding networking. So thanks again for joining us tonight. We really appreciate the fact that you're investing in yourself, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.